Welcome to the deep dive. We are incredibly glad you are joining us today
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
because we are tackling a feeling that I think almost everyone has experienced at some point,
Yeah.
especially, over the last few years.
Yeah, it's a very common sentiment right now.
Picture this scenario. You are working hard. You're putting in the long hours. You are aggressively trying to save your money, budgeting, doing everything you were traditionally taught is the right financial thing to do.
The standard playbook.
Right, the standard playbook. Yet, no matter how hard you paddle, you have this pervasive, gnawing feeling that you are constantly falling behind.
Yeah. The cost of living just keeps creeping up.
Exactly. Your savings don't seem to stretch nearly as far as they used to. And you inevitably start to wonder, what exactly is going on here?
You start looking for the catch.
Right. What if the economic game isn't just rigged, but you are playing by a set of foundational rules you were never actually taught?
It is a universally recognizable feeling, and it is exactly why we are diving into our source material today.
Which is really fascinating stuff.
It is. We are looking at extensive excerpts from a book called Capital Offence by Paul Musson. The author takes aim at some very dense, often intimidating economic concepts, and his objective is to systematically decode them.
Strip away all that jargon.
Exactly. His goal is to strip away the complex financial industry jargon and reveal the hidden underlying mechanics of how the modern global financial system actually operates beneath the surface.
And that is our specific mission for this deep dive. We are going to rebuild the concept of the economy entirely from scratch.
From the ground up.
Right. Starting with the most basic yet most misunderstood question. What actually is money? From there, we are going to uncover the mechanics of genuine wealth creation and contrast that with what the author describes as stealth wealth confiscation.
Which is a heavy term.
It is, but we want to give you the analytical tools to understand the monetary system that is basically hidden in plain sight.
Now, before we really get into the weeds, it is important to offer a clear disclaimer.
Always good to set the ground rules.
Right. The text we are examining today contains strong, pointed critiques of governments, central banks, policymakers, and modern monetary policy. In our deep dive, we will impartially explore these arguments so that you can thoroughly understand the author's perspective.
We are just the messengers here.
Precisely. We are not taking any political sides, nor are we endorsing these specific viewpoints, whether they lean to the political left or right. Our goal is simply to objectively convey the ideas contained in the original source material and analyze how they logically fit together.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with money itself. If you walk down the street right now and ask 10 different people what money means to them, you are going to get wildly different, intensely emotional answers.
Oh, absolutely.
Someone will say security. Another will say greed,
Yeah.
freedom, power.
Someone might quote scripture and say it is the root of all evil.
While another person might argue it's the absolute key to happiness and autonomy. Money carries an extraordinary amount of emotional and psychological weight for all of us.
It absolutely does. And the author argues that this heavy emotional weight is exactly what clouds our understanding of the actual practical utility of money.
How so?
Well, the root of so much economic frustration in our society isn't money itself. Money fundamentally is inanimate. The frustration comes from a widespread foundational misunderstanding of what money actually represents.
Okay, I'm tracking.
To understand this clearly, we have to strip away the emotional baggage and look at what life was like before money existed. We have to examine the extreme friction of a pure barter economy.
Okay, I love this thought experiment from the book. To really isolate the utility of money, the author strips away modern finance and drops us into a conceptual barter economy model.
Right, let's build the village.
Let's do it. Imagine a primitive village. You are the local blacksmith, and you make excellent iron axes.
Yeah.
Now, you need to eat, and you have decided you want some eggs. So you grab one of your heavy axes, you walk down to the village market, and you find the chicken farmer.
And right there, you immediately hit the first of 6 major structural problems with a barter economy.
Which is?
Economists call this the coincidence of wants. For any economic exchange to happen in a barter system, both parties have to simultaneously want exactly what the other person has.
I want eggs, but...
But if the chicken farmer already has an axe, or simply doesn't need an axe today, you don't get your eggs.
So what do I do?
You are now forced into a complex web of secondary trades. You have to wander the market, hoping to find someone who needs an axe, who also happens to produce something the chicken farmer actually wants, like maybe leather shoes.
Right, which creates massive transaction costs in terms of your time and energy. You trade the axe to the cobbler for 2 pairs of shoes, then take 1 pair of shoes back to the chicken farmer just to get your breakfast.
It is an exhausting way to conduct a life.
It really is. And that illustrates the second massive problem: unit of account.
This is a big one.
How many eggs equal 1 axe?
Mm-hmm.
How many loaves of bread equal a pair of shoes?
Mm-hmm.
If you have just 50 goods in the village, the pricing cross-references become a mathematical nightmare.
Exactly. Without a standard unit of account, 1 axe might be 20 dozen eggs to one person, but 2 pairs of shoes to another, or 100 loaves of bread to someone else. There is no baseline metric to measure value against.
Which leads to the third problem, which is divisibility. Let's say you only want 1 single dozen eggs.
Okay.
The chicken farmer agrees to trade and says, sure, that will be 1/20th of an axe.
What are we supposed to do with that?
Exactly. What are you supposed to do? You cannot divide an iron axe into 20 functional pieces.
Gotcha.
If you break it, you destroy its value entirely. A medium of exchange has to be divisible into smaller fractions to facilitate minor transactions.
And even if you could divide it, you run into the fourth problem, which is portability.
Because axes are heavy.
Very heavy. Walking around a physical market dragging a heavy wooden cart full of iron axes just to trade for your weekly groceries is physically grueling. A functional economy needs a medium of exchange that is easy to transport.
Makes total sense. Then there is the fifth problem, which I think is one of the most critical when we talk about building long-term wealth: store of value.
The rotting bread example.
Yes. Let's say the village baker works incredibly hard, puts in a 70-hour week, and bakes 1,000 loaves of bread. He wants to save that surplus wealth for his retirement or for a rainy day.
But he physically cannot.
No. In a week, his entire accumulated wealth is covered in mold. It rots. His hard work cannot be stored for the future.
Finally, the sixth problem is fungibility. An efficient economy requires a uniform medium of exchange. If you lend someone a gallon of premium gasoline, you don't care if they give you the exact same specific molecules back a week later.
You just want a gallon of the exact same grade of gasoline.
Exactly. It is interchangeable. Money has to be completely fungible. A $10 bill must be identical in its purchasing power and acceptance to any other $10 bill in circulation.
So when you look at these 6 severe friction points of barter, coincidence of wants, unit of account, divisibility, portability, store of value, and fungibility, you realize something profound.
Which is?
Money wasn't some arbitrary top-down invention decreed by an ancient king or a government. It was a grassroots technological solution. It was an innovation that naturally emerged to solve the immense friction of barter.
That is a crucial paradigm shift. Viewing money as a technology rather than a government product changes everything. And the book uses a brilliant analogy to explain what money actually represents in this context.
I love this part.
Think about a framed college diploma hanging on the wall of a doctor's office. If you just look at the raw physical materials, the piece of paper, the ink, the wooden frame, the glass, it has almost no inherent physical value.
It probably costs less than $20 to manufacture.
Exactly. But its true value, obviously, comes entirely from what it represents. That piece of paper represents years of intense late-night studying, brutal clinical rotations, board exams, immense hard work, and the accumulation of highly specialized knowledge.
The diploma itself is just a proxy.
Right. The physical diploma is merely a receipt. It is a certificate acknowledging the effort and the human capital value that has already been created by that specific individual.
This perfectly encapsulates Say's law. The classical French economist Jean-Baptiste Say argued that production is what actually creates the ability to purchase.
Yes.
The diploma analogy applies perfectly to our modern concept of money. Money is just a standardized receipt for goods and services that have already been produced and contributed to the economy.
It's the proof of work.
Exactly. The real means of payment isn't the physical paper in your wallet or the digital digits on your banking app. The real means of payment is the actual stuff, the labor, the products, the services you produced to acquire those receipts in the first place.
If we extrapolate this to the broader macroeconomic picture, you begin to see the core fallacy that the author identifies in modern monetary policy.
Which is the printing press.
Right. You cannot just print a million fake medical diplomas, hand them out to random people walking down the street, and suddenly claim you have created a million new qualified doctors.
Society didn't get any healthier.
No, you just diluted the meaning of the diploma. In the exact same logical way, the author argues, you cannot simply print money to instantly create economic wealth. Real wealth is the actual stuff, the goods, the innovative services, the human ingenuity, the infrastructure. Money is merely the accounting tool, the receipt used to move that tangible wealth around efficiently.
Okay, so if we accept that money naturally emerged purely to solve these barter problems,
Yeah.
what did those early organic receipts look like?
They took a lot of different forms.
The book provides a fascinating historical case study to prove that this happens naturally, even in the most restricted environments imaginable. It focuses on an Allied prisoner of war camp in Germany during the Second World War.
The R.A. Radford study.
Yes. An economist named R.A. Radford was actually interred in this camp, and he documented a microeconomy forming literally out of thin air. The prisoners regularly received Red Cross care packages containing random assortments of items: a bit of cheese, some chocolate, tins of sardines, and cigarettes.
And predictably, because of the coincidence of wants, the prisoners naturally started bartering.
Right.
The prisoner who hated cheese but loved chocolate traded with the prisoner who loved cheese but didn't care for sweets. But very quickly, the natural friction of barter set in. Coordinating these complex multi-party trades became too difficult.
They needed a medium.
They desperately needed a universal medium of exchange. And organically, without any camp commander decreeing it, they settled on cigarettes as their currency.
The fascinating part is that even the non-smokers eagerly accepted them.
Precisely. Even if you despise smoking, you gladly accepted cigarettes in trade because you recognize they perfectly solved all 6 barter problems.
They check all the boxes.
They really do. They were highly portable, easily divisible into individual cigarettes, fungible, and importantly, they served as a reliable store of value that didn't rot like cheese. Everyone in the camp accepted them as a standard unit of account.
So a tin of sardines wasn't fractions of a chocolate bar anymore.
No, it was priced at exactly 3 cigarettes. This historical microcosm is powerful because it empirically proves that money naturally emerges from free markets and human interaction. It is a spontaneous order. It absolutely does not require a central government or a central bank to exist.
From commodities like cigarettes or salt, human societies globally and largely independently across different continents eventually settled on precious metals as the ultimate technology for money.
The era of hard money.
Right, and we can actually see the linguistic ghosts of this era in the very names of our modern fiat currencies. The word dollar originates from the thaler, which was a standardized, highly trusted silver coin minted in Europe centuries ago.
And the British pound literally originally meant a physical pound weight of sterling silver.
Because these were commodity monies, their value was inherently tied to the physical weight and scarcity of the metal itself. This physical constraint made it exceedingly difficult for rulers or governments to manipulate the money supply to fund their ambitions.
They certainly tried.
Oh, they definitely tried. And this is where the history of inflation really begins. The book details the infamous example of the Roman denarius.
A classic case study.
Around 211 BC, the denarius was an almost pure silver coin. It was the bedrock of the Roman economy. But over the next 452 years, successive Roman emperors, needing to fund massive military expansions and lavish public works, slowly debased the coin.
They would melt it down.
Yeah, they would melt it down, mix in cheaper base metals like copper or lead, and reissue it. By the end of this period, the silver content of the denarius had dropped by 65%.
When you hear a number like a 65% drop in purity, it sounds like a catastrophic, massive theft of purchasing power from the Roman citizens.
And it was.
But the author makes a brilliant mathematical point here. When you actually do the math, dropping 65% over a span of 452 years equates to only a tiny 0.2% annual debasement.
0.2%.
Right. It was so slow, so gradual, that the average Roman citizen barely noticed it happening in their lifetime. Now, compare that incredibly slow, stealthy Roman theft to modern inflation targets.
The comparison is striking, and it is a central pillar of the author's critique. Modern central banks explicitly target a 2% annual inflation rate as a stated policy goal.
Which is 10 times faster than the Roman debasement that historians point to as a key factor in the fall of the empire.
10 times faster. To illustrate the devastating effect of this, the book breaks down a specific data point comparing the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar in the year 1925 to 2024.
Let's walk through the mechanics of this because it's eye-opening.
Okay, let's do it. In 1925, under a gold standard, 1 physical ounce of gold was priced at exactly $20.67. Also in 1925, a gallon of milk cost about 56 cents.
So they were basically equivalent.
Yeah, so if you held a $20 paper bill, or you held 1 physical ounce of gold, Your purchasing power was virtually identical. You could buy roughly 37 gallons of milk.
Okay, now let's fast forward nearly a full century to 2024. That exact same $20 paper bill with George Washington's face on it buys you maybe 5 gallons of milk today, assuming milk averages around $4 a gallon.
Wow.
By holding the paper receipt, you permanently lost the ability to buy 32 gallons of milk. Your purchasing power evaporated.
But what about the person who held that one physical ounce of gold?
Well, in 2024, an ounce of gold is valued at roughly $2,500. With that $2,500, you can buy 635 gallons of milk.
The math there is just wild. It clearly demonstrates the core argument. The physical commodity, the gold, not only held its value, but actually expanded its purchasing power relative to a consumer staple like milk.
Meanwhile, the paper fiat currency aggressively and continuously leaked purchasing power.
And to anticipate a common counterargument, the author calculates what would happen if you were a prudent saver and put that original $20 into a compounding interest bank account.
Right, yielding 3% or even 5% for an entire century.
Exactly. Once you account for the taxes you are legally required to pay on that nominal interest yield every single year, the compounding bank account still falls drastically short of simply holding the inert physical gold.
The obvious question then is, how did we get from a system constrained by gold coins to a system where our paper money inherently leaks value so quickly?
Right. How did the rules change?
To understand this, we have to look at the plumbing of the financial system, specifically fractional reserve banking. This is a critical concept to decode because it is the actual mechanism by which the money supply expands in our modern world.
It is not just a printing press in a basement.
No, it's much more complex. Let's imagine you strike it rich and have 10,000 physical gold coins. You rightfully don't want to hide them under your mattress where they can be stolen, so you deposit them into Bank A for safekeeping.
Okay, I take my gold to Bank A.
When you make that deposit, Bank A gives you a paper receipt, or in modern terms, a digital deposit record on your app, acknowledging that you have $10,000. But Bank A is a business.
They want to make a profit.
Right. They know from historical probability that you and all their other depositors are not going to come back tomorrow and simultaneously demand to withdraw all your physical coins.
That would be a bank run.
Exactly. So in a fractional reserve system, the bank is legally permitted to keep only a small fraction, let's use 10% for easy math, in their actual vault as a reserve against daily withdrawals.
So they keep 1,000 of my gold coins on reserve.
And they lend the other 9,000 coins out to someone else to own interest.
Let's follow the ledger on this. They lend those 9,000 coins to a local entrepreneur, Jack the Cobbler. Jack takes out this loan and immediately uses the 9,000 to buy heavy shoemaking equipment from an industrial supplier.
The industrial supplier gets paid.
Yep. The industrial supplier receives the 9,000 and deposits it into their own corporate account across town at Bank B. Now, let's pause and look at the total accounting ledger of this microeconomy.
This is where it gets interesting.
You look at your phone for Bank A, and your balance says $10,000. The industrial supplier looks at their account for Bank B and sees a balance of $9,000.
Yeah.
The total perceived deposits in the economy are now $19,000.
But the physical reality hasn't changed.
Exactly. There are still only 10,000 actual physical gold coins in existence.
And the expansion process doesn't stop there. Bank B receives that 9,000 deposit. They keep 10% 900 coins on reserve and immediately lend out the remaining 8,100 coins to another borrower.
It just cascades.
It does. This continuous process of depositing and lending cascades through the banking system, mathematically multiplying the money supply all the way up to $100,000 in paper or digital deposit claims.
But all of it is precariously balanced on a foundational base of only 10,000 physical gold coins.
I can hear people listening thinking, isn't that incredibly dangerous?
It sounds terrifying.
Under a strict gold standard, it absolutely was risky. It was essentially a high-stakes game of financial musical chairs. If an economic panic occurred and everyone rushed to the banks at once to demand their physical gold, a classic bank run, the system would seize up because the gold simply wasn't there.
But critically, the total expansion was ultimately constrained by the physical reality of the gold base.
Yes. You could only stretch the fraction so far. You couldn't just invent physical gold out of thin air to cover the shortfall.
But that fundamental constraint changed forever in 1971.
The Nixon shock.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was the year the world, led by the United States, shifted entirely off the gold standard and onto a pure fiat standard.
That date is a massive inflection point in economic history. The word fiat is Latin for let it be done, or by decree. A fiat currency has value solely because the government declares it is legal tender and requires you to pay your taxes in it.
When that final tenuous tether to physical gold was completely severed in 1971, the physical constraint on money creation vanished entirely.
The central bank could now step in as the lender of last resort and create infinite bank reserves electronically at literally zero cost to backstop the fractional reserve system.
And even when they do have to print physical cash, the book highlights a stunning, almost absurd detail. It costs the Federal Reserve only 19.6 cents to print a $100 bill.
Just think about the margins on that.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
When the marginal cost of producing money drops to near zero, the political temptation for policymakers to attempt to solve every complex societal and economic problem simply by printing more of it becomes irresistible.
Which brings us to the core philosophical difference between creating money and creating wealth. To illustrate why expanding the fiat money supply doesn't actually make a society richer, the author utilizes a simplified, isolated island economy model.
This is a great thought experiment. Let's set it up.
Let's imagine you are stranded on a remote island with two other people, Shirley and Jane. You have to survive, so you divide the labor based on your skills. You are great at fishing, so you spend your day at the shore and catch exactly 3 fish.
Okay, I've got my 3 fish.
Shirley is an excellent climber, so she scales the trees and gathers 3 coconuts. Jane hikes up the steep mountain and fetches 3 liters of fresh, clean water.
At the end of the day, we all meet at the campfire and agree to trade evenly. A 1-to-1 ratio. 1 fish for 1 coconut for 1 liter of water.
Exactly.
If we calculate the total gross domestic product, the total real wealth produced by our entire island economy every single day, it is exactly 3 fish, 3 coconuts, and 3 waters. 9 units of tangible life-sustaining wealth.
That is the real economy.
Right. Now, let's introduce a monetary system. Let's say each of us arrived on the island with exactly $2 in our pocket. That is a total money supply of $6 in the whole economy. Because everything trades equally, each individual item naturally prices itself at $1.
Now, let's inject a monetary intervention into this stable system. Imagine Shirley used to work as a central banker before she was shipwrecked.
Oh, boy.
She looks around the island and says, everyone looks a bit lethargic. We need to stimulate this economy. We need robust economic growth. I am going to enact quantitative easing and print more money.
Island QE.
Yes.
Yeah.
Through some island magic, she prints 6 brand new dollars. She hands 2 to you, 2 to Jane, and keeps 2 for herself. The money supply has just doubled from $6 to $12.
Everyone's personal cash balance has doubled from $2 to $4. I feel incredibly wealthy. I run to Shirley with my $4 and say, this is great. I want to buy TDO coconuts today instead of 1.
But Shirley looks at you and says, I only gathered 3 coconuts today. There are no extra coconuts.
Oh. The reality check.
This perfectly highlights the monetarist view of inflation. For an audience that follows macroeconomics, this is the absolute crux of the debate between classical economics and modern monetary theory. What actually changes in reality when the money supply doubles?
The answer is nothing. There are still only 3 fish, 3 coconuts, and 3 waters. Aggregate supply hasn't changed.
The only variable that must logically change is the nominal price.
Because everyone now has twice as much paper money chasing the exact same finite amount of physical goods, the price of a coconut simply adjusts upward, doubling from $1 to $2.
Exactly. The author is arguing that expanding the money supply without a corresponding increase in actual productivity does not stimulate real aggregate demand. It merely dilutes the purchasing power of the existing currency.
The printing of fiat money is entirely neutral to actual physical wealth creation.
Right. It doesn't create more stuff.
So if printing receipts doesn't print actual wealth, how do we actually create wealth in this model? Let's introduce a new variable. A 4th survivor, Bill, washes ashore. Bill is hungry and wants coconuts, but he looks at Shirley climbing the trees and thinks, that is incredibly dangerous and inefficient. Bill decides to use his human ingenuity. He spends his first day gathering vines and lashing a bunch of long sticks together to create a specialized tool.
He invents capital equipment.
Exactly. Now, Bill can stand safely on the ground and simply knock the coconuts down. With this technological innovation, Bill can collect 10 coconuts a day.
This represents the vital role of the entrepreneur and capital accumulation in an economy. Bill has introduced technological innovation and, crucially, market competition.
Because Bill is collecting coconuts much faster and with significantly less physical risk than Shirley, he can afford to lower his prices.
He passes the savings on.
He offers to trade his coconuts to you for only half a fish instead of a whole fish. He drastically undercuts Shirley's monopoly.
Now, I want to play devil's advocate for a moment because a lot of people might look at Bill arriving and say, well, Bill just destroyed Shirley's livelihood. He's a ruthless capitalist ruining the island's harmony.
That's a very common perspective. But how does the book address the systemic effect of Bill's disruption?
The book relies heavily on classical economic theory here, specifically the concept of the invisible hand popularized by Adam Smith. Yes, Shirley faces immediate pressure, but she has to respond to survive. She is forced to innovate herself.
She can't just keep doing things the old way.
Right. Perhaps she realizes she can't compete in harvesting, but she notices the coconuts fall and break, so she spends her time weaving a net to catch the falling coconuts, partnering with Bill to speed up his process even further.
What is the macroeconomic result for the island? The total production of coconuts absolutely skyrockets,
And because there is now a massive abundance of coconuts, the real price of a coconut plummets.
which introduces a concept that is almost heretical in modern central banking circles, the idea of good deflation.
It is a controversial idea today.
We are constantly told by financial media that deflation is a terrifying economic boogeyman that will cause a depression. But the author argues that the natural, healthy tendency of a free market, driven by relentless innovation and competition, is actually deflationary.
Over time, as technology improves, whether it's lashing sticks together or building advanced microchips, things should naturally get cheaper and more abundant.
This means the purchasing power of your wages should organically increase every year. You should be able to buy more stuff with the exact same salary.
But there is a prerequisite to that innovation, and this is where the Austrian School of Economics heavily influences the author's work. To build that long stick, Bill had to spend an entire day tying it together.
During that day, he wasn't harvesting coconuts.
He wasn't immediately consuming. If he wanted to eat that day, he had to rely on coconuts he had previously saved up.
Let's apply this back to me catching fish. If I want to invent a wide fishing net to catch 100 fish a day instead of 3, I have to stop fishing with my bare hands for 2 solid days to weave the net.
And this introduces the foundational concept of time preference. To build capital infrastructure like a fishing net, a coconut stick, or a modern robotic assembly line, you must defer immediate consumption.
You absolutely have to save.
A person or a society with a high time preference is entirely focused on the present. They want to consume everything today. They eat all their fish immediately. They never take the time to build a net. They stay at a subsistence level forever.
Conversely, a person or a society with a low time preference is willing to fast or rely on accumulated savings and delay their immediate gratification for a few days, months, or years so they can direct their energy into building a tool or a business that will make them vastly wealthier and more productive in the future.
Low time preference, the willingness to defer consumption to accumulate capital, is the singular engine of human economic progress. You cannot consume your way to long-term prosperity.
Which perfectly sets us up to tackle some of the most dangerous, widely accepted economic fallacies out there. Because if saving and investment are the true drivers of wealth, why do we constantly hear politicians arguing that we just need to spend more to stimulate the economy?
To deconstruct this, the source leans heavily on the work of a brilliant, highly influential 19th century French economist named Frédéric Bastiat.
The broken window fallacy.
Yes. Bastiat articulated what is famously known as the broken window fallacy. This fallacy is an absolutely essential conceptual model for understanding why so many massive, well-intentioned government stimulus policies ultimately fail to generate real wealth.
Bastiat's scenario goes like this. Imagine you are a small business owner. You own a bicycle shop. A local hooligan walks by, picks up a heavy brick, and throws it right through your massive, expensive plate glass window.
The window shatters into 1,000 pieces.
You are furious and upset, but you have a business to run, so you hire Glenn the glazier to come and fix it. You pay Glenn $1,000 for the installation of the new window.
Now, a crowd of onlookers gathers outside your shop. Someone in the crowd, perhaps an amateur economist, says, "Well, it is certainly a terrible shame your window broke, but look on the bright side of the macroeconomic ledger."
You just stimulated the local economy.
Exactly. Glenn the glazier now has $1,000 in income he didn't have yesterday. Glenn is going to take that $1,000, go down the street, and buy a new custom suit.
The tailor will take that $1,000 and buy a new pair of shoes from the cobbler.
The velocity of money is increasing. This broken window is actually an economic miracle for the town.
It sounds plausible on the surface, which is why it's such a persistent fallacy.
But Bastiat calls this the trap of focusing on that which is seen while ignoring that which is unseen.
What the crowd clearly sees is Glenn getting paid $1,000. It looks exactly like productive economic activity.
But what is unseen, the unseen reality, the massive opportunity cost, is that you, the shop owner, had been diligently saving that $1,000 for months because you were planning to buy a new television that afternoon.
Because I was forced to fix my window just to get back to baseline, the television salesman lost a $1,000 sale.
The net result is that zero new wealth was created. Society as a whole is not wealthier. Before the hooligan threw the brick, you had a perfectly functional window. A&D, you had $1,000 in capital ready to deploy.
After the brick, I just have a window, and my $1,000 is gone. I essentially destroyed $1,000 of accumulated capital just to tread water.
And yet, if you turn on a financial news network today, this exact fallacy persists. Whenever a catastrophic hurricane destroys a coastal city or there is a massive war, you will inevitably see pundits arguing that the massive government spending on the rebuilding effort will be a great stimulus for the local economy.
It is an entirely absurd notion when you break it down logically. You cannot destroy existing capital to create new wealth. Rebuilding a destroyed city is a tragic necessity, but it is not a net economic positive.
It is a massive diversion of resources that could have been used to build new innovations, cure diseases, or improve living standards.
And exploring the mechanics of wealth destruction leads us to one of the most provocative and illuminating thought experiments in the book regarding the actual mechanics of the money supply.
We talked about Shirley printing money on the island. Let's look at the inverse.
Imagine an eccentric billionaire goes to the bank, legally withdraws $10 billion in physical $100 bills. They pile it all up in their backyard, pour gasoline on it, and set it on fire.
Just burns $10 billion to absolute ash.
It sounds like an act of pure madness, but analytically, let's examine what actually happens to the macroeconomic system. Obviously, on a personal level, the billionaire is now $10 billion poorer.
But what about society as a whole? Did the billionaire destroy any actual physical wealth? Did any factories burn down or any agricultural fields destroyed?
Did human knowledge decrease? No. The physical assets, the productive capacity of the world remain exactly the same as they were 5 minutes before the fire.
The only variable that changed is that there is suddenly $10 billion less paper money circulating in the global economy.
And this is where the mechanics of deflation become clear.
Yeah.
Because there is now less money chasing the exact same amount of finite goods and services in the world, the purchasing power of every single remaining dollar held by everyone else mathematically goes up.
Prices across the board would marginally fall. By actively destroying their own personal money, the billionaire didn't destroy wealth.
They essentially executed a massive silent wealth transfer, gifting proportional purchasing power to every other person on Earth holding cash.
That is exactly right. However, the author points out a massive, highly consequential catch to this deflationary dynamic. While the cash saver benefits immensely, there is one specific, highly leveraged group of people who are deeply financially wounded by this billionaire's bonfire.
Debtors.
Debtors. Let's break that down because this is the key to understanding modern monetary incentives. If you had a fixed-rate mortgage or a business loan of $100,000 and the overall money supply suddenly shrinks drastically, dollars become much harder to come by in the economy.
Deflation sets in. Your wages might drop nominally, but your debt doesn't adjust. The real underlying economic burden of your fixed $100,000 loan just skyrocketed.
You literally have to surrender more of your labor and productivity to earn the scarce dollars required to pay back that fixed nominal debt.
So we establish a clear dynamic. Shrinking the money supply, or deflation, organically transfers wealth to cash savers and severely punishes debtors.
Now, if we logically invert that dynamic, we uncover the author's primary thesis regarding central banking. If destroying money helps savers and hurts debtors,
then printing money, expanding the money supply, must logically do the exact opposite.
and there's the aha moment. Printing money or expanding credit acts as a silent, unlegislated tax.
It continuously steals purchasing power away from cash savers, everyday people trying to be responsible, putting money in a savings account or a pension.
And it vastly rewards individuals and entities with massive fixed debts. Why? Because the debtor gets to pay back their old loans using newly printed, heavily diluted, much less valuable dollars.
And we must ask, who is, by an astronomical margin, the largest debtor in the entire history of human civilization?
It is sovereign governments. This is the crux of the book's argument. Governments are fundamentally incentivized to continuously expand the money supply and run structural deficits.
It diminishes the real inflation-adjusted burden of their staggering national debts, while silently confiscating the accumulated savings of the citizenry to fund their overspending without ever having to pass an unpopular explicit tax increase through a legislature.
I think the counter-argument you would usually hear from an establishment economist is that a little bit of inflation, say 2%, is a necessary evil to encourage consumer spending and prevent a deflationary spiral where everyone just hoards money and the economy grinds to a halt.
But the author argues that this focus on constant spending as the metric of economic health is a dangerous illusion. And that illusion is primarily masked by how we globally measure economic success, which brings us to what the book calls the GDP trap.
Gross domestic product. It is the absolute holy grail metric. Politicians campaign on it, central bankers set policy by it, and the financial media obsesses over every quarterly revision.
But what is it, actually? Let's define it.
The strict definition of GDP is the total monetary measure of the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a specific time period. The critical word there is final.
It explicitly and intentionally excludes intermediate goods. If a company buys raw steel to manufacture a bicycle, the steel transaction isn't counted. Only the final sale of the finished bicycle to the consumer is counted.
When you look at the actual statistical components of U.S. GDP, the breakdown is incredibly revealing about what our economy prioritizes. In 2023, personal consumer spending accounted for a massive 67.9% of total GDP.
Government spending accounted for about 17.2%, though, as the author notes, its economic footprint is effectively much higher if you factor in how massive government transfer payments dictate downstream spending.
Meanwhile, private domestic investment, the actual building of factories, research and development, the accumulation of capital, was only around 17.5%.
And here is the fatal methodological flaw that the author rigorously highlights. GDP primarily, almost exclusively, measures spending.
But economically speaking, spending is just the end symptom. It completely ignores the prior saving, the deferred consumption, and the capital investment that makes the spending possible in the first place.
If you go to a fast food restaurant, buy a greasy $10 cheeseburger, and immediately eat it, GDP registers a positive blip. The metric applauds you.
But if an entrepreneur spends 2 years meticulously building a highly efficient, high-tech factory, taking time and vast resources away from immediate consumption, GDP might actually look sluggish or negative in the short term because immediate consumption dropped.
GDP systematically rewards short-term immediate consumption while mathematically penalizing long-term wealth creation.
To make this abstract concept incredibly tangible, the book uses an analogy that I think everyone can relate to, especially in the age of Instagram, where everyone is projecting a certain lifestyle.
Imagine you have a neighbor. You look over the fence, and your neighbor appears to be living an incredibly prosperous life. They just installed an expensive new swimming pool in the backyard.
They completely renovated their kitchen with top-of-the-line marble countertops and imported appliances.
And right now, they are packing their brand new luxury SUV to take the family on a lavish vacation to Disney World. If a government macroeconomist looked at your neighbors strictly through the mathematical lens of GDP, they would declare your neighbor an absolute economic hero.
Their final spending metrics are off the charts. They are driving the economy forward.
But what you happen to know, because you talked to them over the fence, is the underlying reality of their balance sheet. You know that your neighbor's small business is actually struggling severely. Their revenues are down.
They are paying for the pool, the luxury kitchen, and the Disney trip entirely by maxing out high-interest credit cards and taking out a massive second mortgage on their house.
They are essentially a financial zombie. They are aggressively masking the rapid destruction of their own capital by piling on massive amounts of borrowed money.
If you only look at the symptom, the loud, visible spending, you incorrectly assume they are rich. If you look at the unseen reality of the balance sheet, you realize they are teetering on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy.
And the terrifying part is that this micro-level consumer debt illusion translates perfectly directly to the macroeconomic level of sovereign nations. When an entire economy's underlying productivity and innovation naturally slow down, policymakers panic because the sacred GDP number starts to drop.
To prop up the illusion of prosperity, they aggressively encourage debt. They artificially lower interest rates to zero to incentivize millions of neighbors to borrow more money for hot tubs and kitchen renovations they can't afford.
This brings us to another vivid, almost tragic analogy from the text: the Federal Reserve riding an economic horse.
It is a profound metaphor for the boom and bust business cycle. Imagine the chair of the Federal Reserve is riding a horse on a cross-country journey from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. He has a rigid mandate. He wants the horse to walk at exactly 4 miles per hour, no matter what.
That 4 miles per hour represents his target GDP growth rate. For the first few weeks, the terrain is flat, the weather is cool, and the horse comfortably walks at 4 miles per hour. The financial press cheers, and the politicians take credit for a booming economy.
But as they hit the Midwest, it becomes incredibly hot, and they face steep hills.
Naturally, biologically, the horse starts to fatigue. It breathes heavily. It organically slows down to 3 miles per hour to prevent overheating and a heart attack.
In economic terms, this natural slowing down is a healthy, absolutely necessary market correction. It is a recession. The economy is trying to rest, liquidate bad debts, flush out inefficient zombie companies, and clear out all the malinvestment from the previous boom. It is a healing process.
But the central banker, looking only at his dashboard and his political mandates, cannot accept 3 miles per hour. His mathematical models demand 4.
So instead of letting the exhausted horse rest and recover its strength, he violently digs his spurs into the horse's sides. He slashes interest rates to zero. He injects trillions of dollars of quantitative easing into the banking sector, forcing the horse to speed back up to 4 miles per hour.
The horse surges forward, but it is fueled entirely by adrenaline, pain, and, in our economic reality, cheap debt and printed fiat money.
And this raises the ultimate question. What happens to the horse? By constantly forcing unnatural, debt-fueled growth just to prop up the superficial GDP symptom, the policymaker is systematically exhausting the actual underlying productive capacity of the economy.
Eventually, the monetary spurs stop working. We call this pushing on a string. The horse slows to 2 miles per hour, then 1, despite being spurred violently.
If you continuously spur an exhausted, sick horse instead of letting it rest, eventually it collapses entirely. We are exhausting our economic horse by chasing a vanity metric with debt, instead of allowing the economy to heal through painful but necessary saving and liquidation.
And speaking of government interventions that severely distort the natural healing and efficiency of the market, let's move to the final major section of the source material: trade, tariffs, and the concept of the sovereign consumer.
In the political arena, there is an incredibly persistent bipartisan myth that tariffs and protectionism inherently protect and strengthen a domestic economy.
Let's break down the actual mechanics of a tariff using our bicycle shop example again. Let's say you own a factory in the US and you build a solid, reliable bicycle. It costs you a certain amount to make, and you sell it to the domestic consumer for $500.
Meanwhile, a manufacturer in Italy figures out a vastly more efficient way to source aluminum and build a slightly better, lighter bicycle. Because of their innovation, they can ship it all the way to the US and profitably sell it for only $400.
Naturally, the US consumer, looking to maximize their own purchasing power, starts buying the $400 Italian bike.
You, as the domestic manufacturer, start losing market share. Your business suffers. So instead of going back to the drawing board, innovating, cutting your own costs, or building a better product to compete, you take the political route.
You hire a lobbyist, you go to Washington, and you complain to your local politician. You argue that the Italians are destroying American industry. We must protect American jobs.
The politician, seeking your campaign contributions and the votes of your workers, agrees. The government legislates a 50% import tariff specifically on the Italian bike. That adds a direct $200 tax at the border.
Suddenly, the superior Italian bike costs $600 in the store. Now your $500, slightly inferior bike looks like the most rational deal again, and your domestic sales recover.
Now, I can hear a local manufacturer listening to this and arguing, well, yeah, that $100 tariff is just the necessary premium we pay as a society to keep American factories open, keep supply chains local, and keep communities employed. It's a net positive.
But how does the book deconstruct the unseen human cost of that specific intervention?
The book utilizes public choice theory to show who actually wins and loses in this scenario. Let's look at the concentrated beneficiaries. You, the inefficient domestic producer, absolutely win. You are protected from competition and don't have to innovate.
The government bureaucracy wins because they collect a new stream of tax revenue on whatever Italian bikes still manage to sell at $600.
But who is the massive dispersed loser? The author calls them the sovereign consumer, the everyday citizen. Because of the tariff, the consumer is now forcefully required by law to pay $500 for a bicycle that the free market was willing to provide for $400.
They just had $100 of their hard-earned purchasing power silently confiscated.
And going back to Bastiat's unseen reality, that is $100 the consumer could have saved, invested, or used to buy a new pair of running shoes from another local business.
By politically protecting your specific job at the bicycle factory, the government secretly taxed the entire consumer base and destroyed $100 of wealth creation in completely unrelated sectors of the economy.
And this isn't just an abstract theory. The source brings up a highly illustrative real-world example from 2019 when the U.S., embroiled in a trade dispute, slapped a punitive 25% tariff on French and Spanish wines.
It didn't magically make California wine taste 25% better. It didn't improve domestic viticulture. It simply punished everyday Americans who happened to want a glass of Bordeaux with their dinner, forcing them to pay artificially inflated prices to subsidize a political trade war.
This specific dynamic relates to two foundational economic concepts that often confuse people: absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Let's go all the way back to our island with you and Shirley to illustrate why free trade mathematically expands the economic pie for everyone, even when it feels counterintuitive.
Let's set up a scenario. You split your day. You spend half your time fishing and half your time climbing trees for coconuts. Because you are splitting focus, you catch 12 fish and get 10 coconuts. Your total individual output is 22 units.
Shirley is naturally a bit better at climbing, so she splits her day and catches 10 fish but gets 15 coconuts. Her total is 25 units. The whole island, working independently, produces a total of 47 units of food.
But looking at the stats, Shirley clearly has an absolute advantage in harvesting coconuts, and I have an absolute advantage in fishing. If we logically agree to specialize, meaning I dedicate 100% of my time solely to fishing, and she dedicates 100% of her time solely to coconuts, and then we trade our surplus, look at the resulting math.
Because you are focused, you catch 24 fish. She gets 30 coconuts. The total island output immediately jumps from 47 total units to 54 units.
Without working any longer hours, we are both materially wealthier simply because we specialized based on our absolute strengths and traded freely.
That is the easy scenario to grasp. But the author pushes further into David Ricardo's brilliant 19th century theory of comparative advantage. Let's alter the island scenario. What if Shirley is an absolute super athlete? What if she is significantly better and faster than you at both fishing and gathering coconuts?
She has an absolute advantage in every single sector of the economy. Intuition says she shouldn't trade with me at all. She should just do everything herself and ignore me.
Right, why would she trade with an inefficient partner?
Because of opportunity cost. Even if Shirley is a super athlete, she is still constrained by the reality of time. She only has 24 hours in a day.
Ricardo mathematically proved that even if Shirley is vastly superior at everything, it still massively benefits both of you if she identifies her greatest relative strength. Let's say her coconut gathering is 5 times better than yours, while her fishing is only 2 times better.
She should focus 100% of her finite time on her biggest comparative advantage, the coconuts, and trade with me for the fish, even though I am a worse fisherman than she is.
By specializing where her advantage is largest and outsourcing the rest to you, the total aggregate output of the island is maximized. Protectionism, tariffs, and trade wars actively destroy this natural, intricate, wealth-creating efficiency, making the entire global island poorer.
Okay, we have covered a truly massive amount of intellectual ground today. We started by stripping away the deep emotional baggage of money, realizing it is fundamentally just a technological receipt for human effort. A ledger system designed to solve the absolute nightmare of bartering heavy iron axes for fragile eggs.
We tracked its organic evolution from cigarettes in a POW camp to the physical constraint of gold and silver, and finally to the unbacked, infinitely printable fiat paper that modern central banks can digitally create for pennies.
We rigorously examined the island model and saw how expanding that money supply doesn't magically create more coconuts. It simply drives up nominal prices, acting as a stealth mechanism to continuously transfer wealth from responsible cash savers to heavily leveraged debtors, namely governments.
We deconstructed Bastiat's broken window fallacy, proving mathematically that you cannot destroy existing capital to stimulate real wealth. And we exposed how hyper-focusing on the GDP metric tricks policymakers into violently spurring an exhausted economic horse with debt-fueled consumption, rather than allowing the necessary healing of saving and capital accumulation.
It really does profoundly change how you consume the nightly news or read a financial headline, doesn't it? Once you see the hidden mechanics, you can't unsee them. But before we sign off, our expert has a final paradigm-shifting thought for you to chew on, something that builds on everything we've meticulously discussed today but looks toward a very uncertain future.
Throughout this entire deep dive, we've firmly established from the source material that all true underlying economic wealth and value is ultimately derived from human time, physical exertion, deferred consumption, and human ingenuity. Money acts merely as the accounting receipt for that finite human effort. But I want you to look closely at the rapidly approaching horizon of our modern technological world.
It's moving fast.
It is. If artificial intelligence and advanced autonomous robotics eventually drive the marginal cost of human labor and physical mass production down to near absolute zero, what happens to the very foundational concept of money? If machines can infinitely and cheaply produce this stuff, does the unbacked fiat money system, which relies on engineered scarcity, totally collapse under the deflationary weight of infinite technological abundance?
Or do we revert to a bizarre new kind of barter system where the only truly scarce commodity left to trade is genuine human attention?
That is the question.
That is an incredibly profound contradiction. Infinite money meeting zero marginal cost reduction. That is definitely something to keep you up at night pondering.
Thank you so much for dedicating your time and joining us on this deep dive. We hope it helped decode the complex financial matrix a little bit for you and gave you the tools to see past the jargon. Until next time, keep your curiosity sharp and your time preference low.